Yep. So please go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Tamer. Katarina, any words at the beginning?
So I guess maybe a technical question. We have prepared some slides as well. Can you guys see the slides? All good?
It's still loading.
Okay. Maybe I'll try again.
So while it's loading, I would like to reiterate what Tamer said. Tamer, thank you for hosting us. We are very happy to be here. We would love to make this one, useful, and second, interactive. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. If it's in the context of what we are discussing, we want to make sure we can make it useful for the audience. And I would like to share the kind of main reasoning why this topic is important and what we have learned about this topic throughout the time of what we've learned at GeForce, and then we would share a real-life experience of comparing ourselves to working at a startup, comparing to working for a big company. It's a big difference. And at the beginning, I don't want to be talking about, okay, now it works, Katarina, thank you.
Great.
I don't want to be talking about too much about what GeForce does, but you might know that GeForce invests in climate technology companies with a mission of helping the world reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we want to make sure we bet on the right companies. We invest globally, so anywhere in the world, in great and promising companies. And before starting GeForce, I started investing in 2017 with the organization called IPM Group, where we co-founded the technology investing arm called IPM Growth. Invested in 6 companies. One of them went public 18 months ago in the US. It's a battery storage company. It's $2 billion valuation. Second one is now raising 100 million Series C. And the third one is doing a Series B of 50 million. So these companies are growing nicely. And before I was investing in companies, I used to work with startups a lot because you might know Startup Grind. Startup Grind is today the world's largest organization for entrepreneurs. It's based in 125 countries around the world, in 600 cities. And I used to be the managing director for European operations. And the founder has asked me 10 years ago to help him scale. And the organization at the time was in about, I think, 12 cities around the world. So we scaled it quite nicely. It became a world's largest organization for entrepreneurs. I've learned a lot about startups in my time. In the last 10 years, I spoke to maybe 10,000 founders of startups. So I have a lot of experience in this space. But before that, I used to run mobile broadband and mobile multimedia marketing for Orange globally. So I used to work for a big organization, and it took a lot of adjusting to working with startups is not the same, it's different. And on this lecture, I would like to share the experience of what's the difference, what are the advantages, and what can we learn when we are working in startup. So on the next slide, it's just a bit about GeForce. And because we would like to really have a global impact, when we were starting GeForce, we are based in Bratislava and we have part of our team in London. When we were starting, there were about 70 early stage investors, incubators, accelerators in Central Europe alone. And because we have global ambitions, we want to do it on a global stage, we decided to invest globally, not just in Central Europe. And that's why we teamed up with a organization which is very experienced in this way, called Founders Factory, based in London. They invested in over 300 companies and we became the climate technology investment part of Founders Factory. And we are based as Founders Factory all over the world, but we are doing this out of Bratislava and London, but invest anywhere in the world. Now, on the next slide, I would like to compare these two worlds. Working for an organization which is established and has lots of employees, and everybody can help you, everybody is specializing, versus in startup, it's all a bit messy and unstructured, and many people at a startup are doing many things, so there is no strict structure. The advantages are quite clear, and it really depends about our personal setup. Like, what do we enjoy? Do we enjoy discovering things, setting structure in place, or do we enjoy being given a task and just going for it, and every other part of the organization is settled? You know, for example, at a startup, one person can do 5 different tasks because there's nobody else to do it. At a big organization, everybody has a set task, and they just go for it. If they need something, they just ask a colleague who is responsible for that particular part. And so these are two different worlds, and each of them is bringing a different set of skills which we can bring to the table, but also each of these has different level of learning we can get from that. So on the next slide, what I would like to discuss is working at a startup is surely a bit more rewarding because it's way out of our comfort zone. You know, nobody is happy about the danger of the payroll might not be paid next month because the startup is in trouble or doesn't have the revenues at the same level yet. Yet there are some advantages. I don't know if you know, but if you look at Facebook, for example, the first 1,000 employees became millionaires after the IPO of Facebook. And so it's messy, it's unstructured, there's lots of opportunities to get stressed, but the upside is also much more rewarding, you know? And if people are considering working for a startup, it really pays to make a bet on the right kind of company. And if you're working for the right kind of company, one, it's very rewarding, especially if it's a company which is on a mission to achieve something good for the world. It's very more rewarding. But if you bet on the right company, it can also bring long-term advantages and a good upside. Like I mentioned, the example of Facebook. Now, at a startup, everybody's doing everything, or as it should be, you know. And because people are thrown into solving each particular topic, they have to conquer it very fast. So the learning curve, it's very steep at a startup. And you know, people say startup or working at a startup is maybe the best MBA in the world because you're learning on the job. And it can go from having to put together a simple NDA, even though you might not have the right legal background, but that's using and adjusting a template can be just what the startup needs at that time, because startups don't have money to pay for great lawyers to do things like that. Or it can be putting together an application for a grant scheme for your startup, or it can be putting together a job description for a new hire you want to have. There's plenty of things which startups require to do, and there's simply not enough people. And therefore, people have to grow into these roles. So the learning curve is super steep. And at the same time, people who are working in startups, they learn super fast. And because startups at the beginning, you know, they have a limited pool of people they can hire, because if startups don't have too much funding, the budgets are limited. And therefore, they cannot hire super experienced or super senior people. Therefore, people who don't have as much experience grow into it. And that's a very good way of learning things at an accelerated way. And if people are working at a startup for 2 years, this can be the same as an equivalent of working for a big organization for 6 years, if you're doing the work for the right kind of startup. And startups have also lots of creativity available, because the opportunities are endless. It only up to the team of how they want to present themselves, what kind of customers they want to get. There are not so many limitations, whereas in big corporations, you have committees and you have key decision makers, multiple levels of them, which require to make decisions before you can do anything. Whereas at a startup, there's not so many people, and if the founder is okay with that, then you just roll with it. Now, the workload is definitely way bigger, and at most startups, there is no such thing as work-life balance. And Katerina can probably attest to that, because she came from O2, the mobile company, O2 Telefonica. She came to us, and it's a different culture, because startups simply need to deliver the work, otherwise they will die. It's as simple as that. And so it's more stressful, it's less stability, but also the reward, I hope, should be compensating for that. Now, on the next slide, I would like to highlight what kind of people are thriving at this environment, but maybe Katerina, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you to summarize in your experience, because you had a very good way to learn on 2 levels. One, you went through the personal experience of going from a big corporation into a startup. And secondly, because you are at the center of GeForce is doing, and GeForce is also providing operational support to the companies where we invest. So you see into the kitchens of many startups we invested in, and you also see into the kitchens of the startup where we provided support from our grants programs. So can you please give us your take on what kind of people are thriving at a startup versus at a big corporation?
Yeah, so I guess I can compare the two, because I spent 6 years in a big, over 500 employee organization. I worked in strategy, and then I left the company and joined GeForce. I mean, I rather joined the vision of GeForce, because GeForce was, I was the first employee, so there was not much to join. And when I was leaving my corporate world, my manager sat me down, and then the CEO sat me down, and they both tried to talk some sense into me. They failed, but I think it was good advice. My manager told me the story of his wife, as she worked in a startup previously, and it has failed, and everyone lost their jobs and they didn't get paid. Now, 2 years into the startup world, I mean, he was not wrong. This happens, and this can happen a lot. So obviously, the factor that Marian mentioned regarding stability and riskiness is very prominent in startups. But anyways, when I joined GeForce, there was almost nothing. There was no team, no staff, no website, no track record. And I would even say no money. I think there was a little bit there was a smaller fund put together by the co-founders to be able to employ me, but I guess not much more at that point. So everything we needed and everything we wanted, Marian and I had to build from scratch. For the first 3 months, we worked from home. And then we kind of realized that it might make sense to have an office just to, spend some time together and be able to brainstorm more. So what you would have in a corporate world, you would have a facility manager and probably a whole department. But we just went around and visited a couple of co-working spaces and chose one. The next thing we needed was accountant. Obviously, if you want to be a normal company, you need to have some accounting in place. So we start talking to some external accountants, and we had to put some structures and some processes in place. As Maren mentioned, in the first or in the early stages, you have some paperwork to do, and also you need to sign a couple of documents, which can be fairly important in the life of the company. But we didn't have a legal person, so all the legal documents had to be revised by the two of us, and none of us had the legal background. So you kind of end up doing the best you can, but you're never sure if it's enough. So it is a little bit of a bet. One of the first things I was in charge of was, as Maren mentioned, the grants area. We kind of knew that there is a lot of money available for green tech and green startups and the net zero transition. That's something we have heard from people or read somewhere, but that's pretty much all we knew about it. So I think it was a lot of trial and error in the beginning, and my first one of the biggest tasks was to kind of find out how it works, really, how we can help our future portfolio companies tap into the funding. If there's any way for us as G-Force to secure some grants and some funding, to have a little bit more breathing space and to be able to grow the team. And I guess coming back to what makes a good startup hire, especially when the team is extremely small, is your ability to be resourceful. If I had waited for Maren to tell me what to do and how to do it, I think I would still be waiting, because at that point he didn't know much better than I did. So it was a lot of really trying to be entrepreneurial. And I'm not saying this to say that Maren was not experienced or not a good manager, but there's just so much one single person can know. So I think the biggest, or one of the biggest differences for me, was that in the corporate world, there was always someone, behind, or someone you could rely on. There was a person for every single function, whereas in the startup, there is none of it. I was working on important projects in the corporate setting as well, but I kind of had the peace of mind that every single purchase or project would be reviewed by at least 2 or 3 people. So I didn't have the fear of making a critical mistake and jeopardizing the company. Obviously, I had the fear of making a fool of myself, but it's a completely different pressure than, having kind of the burden of, the company's survival. So that's something I think very relevant for especially young people in terms of their professional growth. You can learn a lot in the corporate setting, and you can learn a lot from professionals. None of the key people in the corporate world are there and not knowing what they're doing. They're very skilled and very professional, and they have been doing their job for 10, 15, 20 years. In the startup, it's very different. And you do the best you can, but you're never sure if it's enough or whether you're not making mistakes. And we are making mistakes. Thank God, so far, none of the mistakes made us die. But many times I'm working on tasks and projects without having the oversight and without having the stamp of quality. So I kind of, I am in a constant. It is kind of a stressful situation, but when you go through 3, 5, 10 of these situations, you end up being kind of used to being outside of the comfort zone. And I think this was one of the biggest learnings for me so far. Obviously, I've learned a lot about startups. I knew absolutely nothing about it. After my first conversation with Maren, I went home and I Googled what is venture capital. I didn't know what the venture means. I knew what capital is. But I understood that you don't need to know everything about something in order to start building things from scratch. And that was a big learning because I think I and maybe many women feel a lot of the imposter syndrome, feeling like you don't belong and you don't have all the skill sets required. But really being exposed to so many startups, and most of them are really broken in the beginnings, but then kind of end up building something functioning, reminds me that you really need to solve one problem at a time. And the problem solving is I think the skill I have learned. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for sharing this. Katerina, I want to deep dive into one element, and then we have a question from Amina we should address. So the point, I remember we had discussions a few at the beginning that you don't know startups much, you don't have the experience. And the conversations were about, yes, you don't, but you can learn and you can learn fast. So it doesn't matter whether people have an experience or not, as long as they have an expertise which the startups would need. That's all that matters at the beginning. And then the second element, and that's an amplifier, is how fast can you learn? If you can learn fast and on the go, that's the most important skill at a startup. But I want to address the first point you mentioned, when you sit down with your manager and they share with you, okay, somebody tried, it didn't work. What is a very important point is you only need to be right once. That's all that matters. You know, last week I was in San Francisco. Startup Guy has this big flagship conference, and we had the world's most important VCs. They were president of Y Combinator. There were people from the most important venture capital companies in the world. And one of them, Vinod Khosla, you might know him as a founder of Sun Microsystems. He was the first institutional investor in Google. Now, you know, OpenAI and ChatGPT is important. He was the first investor in OpenAI and ChatGPT. And he asked us a question last week. He mentioned some random company and asked people, do you know what happened with this company that I started? And the answer was no, nobody knew. And he told us 3 other companies and nobody knew what they were. And he said, well, it doesn't really matter because these are my failures. But nobody knows about the company he started 3 months before he started Sun Microsystems. It was a failure, but it doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters, you have to be right only once. This is the key point. And as long as you finish on the first failure, you might be cutting yourself short, and maybe it's not the right way to handle it when you stop at the first failure. Because, for example, in our business, what we do is we are on a mission, and this is also maybe a good lesson for startups, or good approach to startups. You know, we cannot afford to pay the greatest people in the world a lot of money. What we can do is we can share the mission which we try to conquer with the people, and if they believe us, they join us on a mission. And GeForce is on the mission to help the world reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or at least make the needle move towards reduction. And you know, we invested in a fund 1 only in 8 companies, so it's not a lot. But we believe if we make the right bets and we bet on the right horses, we can really help the world make a difference. So, for example, there is a company which we invested in out of Brazil, and what they do is they analyze satellite images, and they can predict forest fires for up to 10 days in advance with a precision of 10 by 10 meters. And if you look at all the forests the planet has lost in the last 20 years, 1/3 of that is due to forest fires. So that's an extremely important topic. And by us helping this one particular company, we make a difference. And that's our mission. And if people are joining startups, it should not be for the money. It should be for the potential impact the startups can have. And if the people bet on the right startup, and help the startup grow, then it might work out. But I would argue that if people join just one startup and it fails and they never do work for any startup ever again, maybe it's a mistake, because you only have to be right once. But let's go and answer the question from Amina Katerina. So she asks, are there any keys to knowing whether this is a good, suitable company for you or not? How do you handle that?
I mean, I had very many doubts when I was joining GeForce. I thought that it might be a huge success or a huge failure and a huge scam. So, but I think in general, and especially,
excuse me.
Well, I mean, I didn't know much about you guys, so you never know.
Okay.
But now I'm talking about a person. I think it's a very there is a different situation when you're joining a team of 0 up to 5 people, or whether the startup has already a team and a product. So I think the evolution is massive and it's pretty fast. But I think as you said, Marian, for me, the two things that I would explore is the mission of the startup. I think we both mentioned several times that the workload is pretty big, and you kind of lose the work-life balance. So if you're working on something that's not meaningful to you, it's just hard. Whereas, if you work on something that's really meaningful and you enjoy doing, then you are happy to give more hours into it. And the second thing are the people. I think that's what we are an early stage investor. So we as GeForce, we invest in very early stage teams. Many of them don't have revenues yet, and the product is still shaping. So I think the key criteria for us is the founding team. And I think this is the most relevant thing for you to consider, whether you're investing in startups, but also considering to join the team. Those are people you will end up working 10 plus hours a day, and they need to be able to execute. So I would really probably do a little bit of your own due diligence and have a good chat with the people and the team you're joining, because that's what makes or breaks the company, not the idea, not the product, but really the team.
Okay,
so
I would like to jump in and address one element you started to talk about, and this is you were not sure whether we are legitimate or not, and you need to be making sure before you decide. So what is extremely important, and this is as important on our side when we decide whether we invest in a company or not, it's due diligence and background checks. When there's a company which makes you an offer, a startup or a scale-up, faster growing startup, it's extremely important to do your homework and learn more about those people who you would be working with. And it goes a long way to ask for some references. You can ask the founder or the CEO for some references, but obviously those names they give to you will be people who will most likely give a positive feedback. So it's important to talk to them and ask questions which are also requiring some honesty, but it's also important to ask other people which those founders have worked with before, previous business partners, previous clients, people from the environment, to understand what kind of people are at that company. If that startup already has some clients, speaking to the clients about how useful the product is, because if they don't find it useful, chances are it's not a company to work with. If people love the product, it's a very strong indicator. But it's also important to understand what the culture of the startup is, because there are startups which are on a great mission, but because the management might not be very good, there might be a toxic environment in the office or in the work. And these things are pretty easy to find out before you join, before you make a big bet. And not many people are doing it. And what we noticed from our work with startups is that the best startups always try to understand what even us as investors, they always ask other founders we have worked with before, what kind of work we do, and which level of support we're providing, because doing these background checks and due diligence is extremely important. Now, Katerina, we have a question from Mohammed here. Do you want to take and see if you can answer it?
So the question is around a database of startups. So we will share this this presentation, and at the end we have included a couple of links where people can find jobs in startups or in climate. So, and also part of the Inspiring the Minds project, we are putting together a list of internship opportunities, and some of them are also in startups. But there are also other different avenues where you can find startups. There are platforms like Crunchbase, but I would encourage maybe just to try to see and join the startup ecosystem in your location or in your area where you want to work. There are certainly many events where you can meet startups face to face and talk to founders.
Yes, good point. I would like to add, so I'm just wanting to add to this. There is a lot of startups. You know, for us, in our first fund, we invested in 8 companies. In order to make very good bets, hopefully, we had to look at 1,200 startups, plenty of them. At the same time, if people are considering working for a startup, and what I noticed in the last 10 years, the best people, or the people who made the most rewarding decisions on working for a startup, they had the list of startups which they would love to work for. And I get this very often, even with companies where I invest. There's this chip making company called Tactium, Tactium.com. They put together GPU, CPU, and TPU into one chip for the cloud. Cloud-based data centers spend 3.5% of the world's energy. And this company needs 10 times less energy at the server side of cloud-based data centers. There's one friend of mine who approached me, hey, I follow Tactium. I think it's a great company. Can you please connect me with the founder? I want to consider working for them. So the best people do a proper due diligence, and they have their own top wish list of companies they would love to work for. And what Katerina is mentioning, you have some events and some lists of great startups, but it can be as simple as watching some news like TechCrunch, for example. If a decent company is raising the next round of funding, it's a good indicator that this company is doing well. And when the company is raising the next round of funding, chances are they are hiring new people. So it's a good way to come in after an announcement of a funding round. If you love the company and the mission, it's good to use this kind of news as a trigger. Maybe it's a good company to work for. Tamer, you had a comment?
Yeah, actually, I have one comment related to Noha question, because I think Noha from Egypt. So actually, if you would like to know startup from Egypt, Noha, because maybe Egyptian or from Middle East people maybe think this startup mechanism or ecosystem is not existing in our countries, in Egypt and Middle East, but actually it exists. There is several people who are working with that. I can share later on Facebook and with you, like a poster with a guy who are working extremely with a startup from the Middle East and Egypt. Also, there is several banks in Egypt. They are investing in a startup, and I know personal people who are already established startup in Egypt, and they succeed to raise funds from investors from US and from Europe. So this ecosystem that Marianne and Katrina try to explain is not limited for Europe or the Western countries. The same system is only existing in Africa and Middle East and other countries.
It's a good point, Tamer. And to give you a fun fact, earlier today I had a call with a fund manager from South Africa called Savant. They have pre-seed fund and a seed fund, and they have an accelerator. And they told us there is a very interesting private equity and VC conference in Egypt in May, which we should attend. So this is how small the world is, and there's plenty of things happening also in Egypt.
Yep.
The startup world.
So maybe just to come back to the slide, this is a selection of the attributes that a great startup hire should have. My colleagues have reminded me to highlight that you don't need to have all of these features to be a great startup hire, and many of them can be developed, and the right mentorship can you get there. But I think what you're probably starting to notice is the willingness to take risk, being resourceful, being able to wear many hats, and being kind of dedicated. So that's, I would say, what comes from as a takeaway for me. And I went through the experience of also hiring a couple of people for our team, because again, we don't have an HR person. Why would we? And what I have learned through talking to dozens of people, and then and seeing people being onboarded to GeForce and either striving or struggling, I think what I now focus on more is the attitude of the person rather than the skill set. And I think this is really important for early stage companies. Obviously, I'm not saying that if you're hiring for a tech role, the person should be only, resourceful, but not know how to write code. But for the other things that can be learned, I think the soft skills and the attitudes are much more important than the hard skills and previous experience.
That's a very good point, Katarina. And I also want to highlight that great startups and great companies, even though they don't know everything, they still are willing to learn. And if you want to learn, why not learning as fast as you can from the best you can? So for example, when we started investing, it was very obvious to us that we need to learn also about new business models. And one of them is technology transfer. It's an important topic, especially in Europe, because many companies are deep technology companies, and technology transfer is an extremely important topic. We felt like we don't know enough about it to learn. So the first thing which, when we started tackling with the topic, Katarina went to take a course from University of Cambridge to learn about this topic. And I'm not saying we are great, but I just want to highlight the point of how important learning is, not only on a personal level, but also on a company level. And great companies have a way of building into the culture of how to learn fast. They share knowledge with other coworkers. They learn also on a group level, not only on the individual level. But Katarina, we discussed about how risky it is to work for a startup. There's plenty of downsides, but this should be all compensated somehow. Can you please tell us about what is the compensation at a startup level compared to a corporation?
Yeah, so we had a chat earlier about this. So obviously the biggest thing you can get from the experience is learning, if it's the right company, if it's not a complete mess and broken. I think in my 2 years at GeForce, I've probably learned much more than my 6 years at the corporation. And I learned about startups, I learned about venture capital, but what I shared earlier, I think the biggest learning or the biggest development for me was my personal growth. Other than the learning, obviously the compensation package is usually a salary, and then something that's called the employee stock ownership plan, or the ESOP. Usually in early stage companies, the ESOP is the prominent part of the package. Is basically the ability of the key hires, especially the early hires, to participate in the company's success as a shareholder. So the company is owned by the founders or early investors, and then a part of the ownership is set aside for remunerating employees. So how the ESOP works is that usually the founders set aside around 10 to 15%, depending company to company, aside for employees. And then the employees have the option, not the obligation, to buy their shares at a lower price than outside investors. And they have this option to buy the shares when the time is right. So when the company is valued much more than at the time when they join the company. Usually the ESOP is not given out just like that. There are some terms and some conditions. And I'm explaining this because if you want to join a company, it's quite important to understand. Usually there is a 1-year cliff. So what this means is that in the first 12 months from the start of your employment, you are not entitled to any shares. And then when you stay with the company for at least a year, in year 1, you kind of unlock a percentage of your total ESOP plan. And then there is what it's called vesting. Usually it's a 4-year vesting. So let's say you have 1% or 10% of the company's shares. That would be divided into 4 years, and every year, either on a monthly or quarterly or yearly basis, you would always unlock the small percentage of your share. The returns are long-term. So this is something that is extremely risky. If the company fails, you get nothing. If the company doesn't fail, it usually takes on average 7 to 10 years for the company to be either acquired or go public, where you can monetize your employee stock option. So this is something, again, to bear in mind. But it's used as a tool to reward and to retain key employees, and to make them also more incentivized to work on increasing the value of the company over time. I've shared, it's a fairly complicated topic, but I've shared an explanatory video here that there's a link, you can have a look later. And if any of you are founders of companies, there's also a really good guide prepared by Index Ventures, one of the best venture capital companies, on how to reward talent in early stages.
Yes, thank you, Katerina. So obviously what's very important here is if the key people in the company, in the startup, feel like they are shareholder, it's a different mindset. You know, you are working on building your own company because you own stock and shares of your company. And that's very important, because if people are just feeling like employees and just do 9 to 5, they don't do as much difference as they feel like they are on the mission together with the founding team. And they also are rewarded by shares. So that's very important. So this is the kind of key topics we wanted to share with you. And maybe we have now 45 minutes down the road. We go into some questions and answer them if you have any specific questions.
I think I can stop sharing at this point. I just want to tell you that here there's the slide with the links. So I will share this with Tamer, and then Tamer can share it with the audience if that's relevant to anyone.
So I would like to thank Marian and Katrina for sharing the experience. I have few things here, not questions, but sort of feedback or summary. But I would like, because we have only 15 minutes, I would like to leave the floor for the audience to start with their questions. But maybe I would like to, before leave the floor, I would like to steal a word from Marian, who said it, working in a startup, we can summarize it as growing in experience. So actually you grow yourself, you get more skills, and you build the experience. So you teach yourself how to get new skills, and at the same time you do business and you grow by yourself and by your team.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, so maybe I can leave the floor for other colleagues who have questions or.
Feel free to jump in.
So just unmute yourself, or if you have a problem with the mic, you can just post your question and we can read it. If not, yeah, please, Anton.
Yes, I have a question. Yeah, thank you very much, because the lecture is fantastic, it's amazing. And I have two questions. Well, in terms of startups, you talk startups, when the startup get the break-even point, do you have an average to say when a measure or a median in terms of a startup, when you can say that we can get profits? Is in 2 years? Because I saw in the slide that this is 7 years, you said, in terms of profit to get the revenues for the shareholders. And the second question is, you wanted to focus on the main important points in a business plan project. What is your choices? Because you talk about very profoundly of the mission to attach people, to attach investors when they see that the missions is the same, that they will see the life and they want to invest the money in it. But you wanted to choose what is the best points. For instance, we say mission, vision, objectives, or financial plan, or operational plan, or market plans. What is your choice? That's my two questions. Thank you very much.
That's a very good question. Thank you for this, Antonio. So when it comes to profits, each company can adjust the key indicators they wanna follow and achieve, and it depends on the mission of the company. So, for example, Amazon has not been profitable for the first 20 years because profitability was never the main objective. The main objective was to become world's largest retailer everything store. So they broke even every year and they reinvested all the profits into the future growth until they came to the point where it became a cash cow, and now it's one of the most profitable companies because the business model allowed for that. So profit is not always the key indicator. It depends on the founder. But if you're on the mission of becoming a globally scalable company, having the global scale is more important than having profits in the year 2 or year 3. When it comes to compensation of key employees at these companies, it's very important to know that the compensation comes from either startup growing very fast and then going public, launching on a stock exchange, and then the retail public can buy the stocks and you can sell your stock because the company is valuable, or another company will acquire you. So the IPO, the public offering, or another company acquiring the startup is one of the key success factors where employees can also cash in. If somebody else buys that company, you sell your stock and you have the upside. Now, when it comes to the key indicators which we are looking for when we looking at a startup, we have a very detailed weighted average of key indicators. And if you ask most investors in the world what they're looking for, the number one is not, they usually say quality of the team and quality of the product and so on. We don't look at that. First of all, the most important by far objective element is timing. Facebook too early is as bad as Facebook too late. Google was not the first search engine in the world, it was number 8. But they had the best algorithm, and even though they launched later, the timing for them was better. So what we look at is timing. That's by far the most important. And then it's very important to bet on the right founding team. And there is one quality of the founding team which is more important than anything else. It's called the grit. It's GRIT. It's the ability of the founders to not give up. And if the founding team is mission driven and not financially driven, if you're doing it for the money, at the problem number 50, you're just going to give up and do something which is easier to build, where you can get the same or more money. If you do it for the mission, because you are mission driven, you just don't give up. You know, if your grandmother died of cancer and you're looking to find an mRNA way of delivering delivering cures against cancer, you just don't give up until you succeed, because it's deeply much more important to you than the money. And usually, if founders are exceptional and mission driven, the success will come. And so the key topics we're looking at is the timing, then the quality of the team, and then we also look for some, because you can have everything, but you just don't have enough traction on the market. And because we provide also very strong operational support after we invest, we need to see some early signs of traction. And usually the best companies are not built on one genius idea. The best companies are built on dozens and dozens of small iterations, which is going in the right direction. And so if a startup has, let's say, a weekly sprint, each week you make an adjustment of the product in the right direction, it compounds together. And after a year, the startup has a great product.
I think there's a really good comment in the chat.
Yeah.
That we need to keep in mind that startups have limited resources.
Yeah, actually,
so-
Katrina, actually this comment is related to another question by Hanan. And here is a summary of the question is, if she has an idea of a startup related to artificial intelligence, how she can compete against big dinosaurs like ChatGPT or Microsoft or. So she said that I have a question regarding the uncertainties, especially for new technology, when I think to do my startup mobile app based on artificial intelligence, but nowadays we have ChatGPT that can replace a lot of mobile apps and jobs, etc. Then how can we change our business model and re-innovate? So if there is any suggestion from your side, if someone who has an idea for a startup related to technology, how they can compete against these big names, giving the resources is limited.
I think before I let Marian answer, I just wanted to come back to his point about founders being having a lot of grit and being mission driven. I think they also need to have the ability to execute and not be just delusional, because you can be also mission driven but not be able to deliver the work. And also, you know, giving the limited time and especially limited money, anyway, resources in general, there needs to be some progression. So that's just a side comment.
Yes, a very good comment. So regarding the topic about the AI, and you know, I host a think tank of top 20 entrepreneurs in Central Europe, and we had a session 2 weeks ago, and we had a session about ChatGPT and especially GPT-4. And I was shocked to find out, and you know, we have people like the co-founder of Kiwi.com, you might know, is a Czech company. They have bigger traffic than Google in the Czech Republic. They do 100 million queries a day, and they have transactions of $250 million every month. And what these companies are doing, and we're a founder of a company called LifeAgent.com. The engineering teams are not writing code anymore because it's all written by GPT. And what is fascinating in this way, and this is also the way to deal with your question, is the speed of change. I don't know if you noticed, ChatGPT it was one of the fastest growing products in the world. It reached about 100 million users within a few weeks. It's incredible. But when ChatGPT came live, Google now feels this existential crisis because ChatGPT is just way better than anything Google built so far. And now, colleagues from Google or friends from Google are asking me, hey, if startups, we have this beta, please let them test it because they don't want to be left out. And this is an existential threat to Google because majority of their revenue is coming from search. And if ChatGPT is able to provide better answers, then the Microsoft search engine can kill Google in a few years, and this is existential. Now, to go to your question, ChatGPT itself, if you look at the OpenAI products, they launched ChatGPT 2 and then ChatGPT 3, and ChatGPT 3 was order of magnitudes better than ChatGPT 2. And I remember about 2 years ago, friends who work with those companies were telling me how massive the change was, how much better it is, and they couldn't wait to hear or to see what ChatGPT 4 would bring. ChatGPT is like 3.5, and GPT 4 is the improvement. Now, you remember ChatGPT launched only a few months ago, and now it is obsolete because GPT 4 is just so much better. And it's very important to understand what these platforms are great at. They are great at providing answers to specific questions which you can ask. But what they are not very good at, and this is coming to your question, Hanan, is that there will always be some space for specialists. And if you look at startups, startups have an ability to be working faster than big corporations. And so I mentioned the conference last week, and the conference last week, we had a few interesting people there, and one of them was the chief product officer of LinkedIn. And what he was saying is that it's true that big companies have a lot more resources, but they also have a lot more priorities. So startups, if they stay super focused, they can have a big advantage. And this is what the chief product officer of LinkedIn was telling us. And that's the answer maybe to your question, because yes, there are things which these generic AI engines can give you a good answer. But to give you one example of how we dealt with this, at GeForce, we want to help the world lower greenhouse gas emissions. One of the companies we invested in is a ChatGPT for materials. They built an AI engine where they put all the properties of all known elements and alloys in the world. And the engine is super refined and very hard to build. So if you ask ChatGPT to provide you answers for on the material level, it's so specialized they cannot do it. And so this is my answer to you. If you can find a special niche on which you can focus, where it's going to be very hard for these generic AI engines to provide generic answers to, the specialization could be the answer. But it needs a lot of strategy thinking on which angle are you going to be focusing on so that you can still be relevant in 5 years from now.
Thanks a lot. We are 1 minute ahead of schedule, but there is a question in chat that was sent by one of our colleagues here and direct to me, and then I reposted on the chat. Can you tell us more about how we can put our foot into the door of getting funds, like investors? How we can ask for investor, how we can reach to investors in general?
Yeah, so I can give you my angle, and then I leave it to Katarina because I need to go to another call. I need to go. But how can you reach investors is, there's plenty of investors out there looking for great ideas, and if these investors are offering money to invest in great companies, most companies will tell you exactly what kind of companies they're looking for, most investors. And if you are ticking the boxes of those companies, reaching out to them is not so hard. And especially early stage investors, they are all okay to just meet you and compare notes. And most investors are on LinkedIn. And then there are these investment platforms like AngelList, for example, and even crowdfunding companies like Seedrs and rCrowd or Crowdcube, which people are happy to put in money into great projects. What is important is really to structure the presentation in a way they understand, and there is plenty of good sources, and we'll be linking to some of them in our presentation as well. So if there are some founders considering to raise money from investors, it's good to speaking to them about how to do it, and we link to this in the presentation.
Yep.
Katrina, what is your take? And if you don't mind, I'm gonna leave now. Tamer, so thank you everybody for
thanks a lot,
listening
Marian,
to me.
for being with us, and we'll leave Katrina for the last comment.
It's
Yeah,
lovely
but
to meet you, and it was great to share.
It's a pleasure with you as well.
Thank you,
Bye
Marian.
bye.
I wanted to suggest that this can be a whole topic for another session, because I think the question was probably aimed more at getting a job in VC, but maybe we can explore this in more detail and also talk a little bit more about how we are analyzing startups as an investor. That's something that Marian already started to explain. But I think the general rule of thumb or the general advice when founders are raising money is to start talking to investors fairly early, and especially when you don't need the money.
Yep.
So having just general discussions and trying to build up interest in your company while not raising actively money puts you in the best position, and you become a more desirable company to invest in, rather than when you are really desperate and very close to the end of your runway. Nobody wants to really invest in desperate companies. And Marian has this way of saying that when you need investment, ask for advice. And when you need advice, ask for investment. So when you start just engaging with investors and talking about your product or the market, ask for their advice. They will, you can learn something important and meaningful. They will feel good about, helping you. Usually investors want to help you, even if they don't invest. And also you will build up interest around the company. Maybe if there are any founders who actually are in the fundraising process or are considering, I think it's also important to highlight that now the market dynamics, given the situation in the financial markets, are very challenging for founders to raise money. So really start the process earlier than you would otherwise, because it can take maybe 3 to 6 months longer than you expect.
Good. Thanks a lot, Katrina. I really would like to thank all of the audience. Thanks, Marian. Someone Amina highlights that this is not enough. 1 hour is not enough. I agree completely, Amina. 1 hour is not enough. We need to review, Katrina, our schedule. Maybe we increase it to 1 hour and a half or 1 hour and 50 minutes. Before you leave, I would like to highlight a few points. One of them reflect on this lecture, because Marian and Katrina highlighted that you need to have a business model in a place, and we would like to inform you that at Cloud Earth AI initiative, we already have our platform for free. You can use it to create a green, sustainable business model. I can share with you this platform in a separate email after we finish the session. Second thing, that since you already attended this lecture, all of you will get a certificate of acknowledgement. Also, in our Inspiring the Mind, we acknowledge all of you. So we have a special website or a special web page to acknowledge. So actually, I will contact you later. Later in May, after we finish our cycle, because we have several cycles of lecture during this month. I will send you like a Google form just to tick if you would like to show your name in the acknowledge page or not. If you like that, just say yes, and we'll put your name there to say thank you for your contribution here. Second, in the coming in May, actually, we have 3 lectures is related somehow to the topic. We have lectures about the diversity and the woman in general, using woman in society. We have lecture about the diversity in working environment. We have lecture about third lecture, I didn't remember, and we have several workshops. So if you allow me again to share this news with you in order to see maybe you are interested to join one of these lectures. Finally, this record will be shared, will be uploaded within 1 or 2 hours and will be shared with you in order that people who are, I can see Sevlin and Angel, they joined a bit late, due to most probably due to the time difference. So I will share the record with all of you. Also, within the context of this project, which includes this lecture and other activity, we run a survey in order to measure a few things related to diversity in society, diversity in workspace, and green skills that people need in order to try to fight against the climate change. So again, if you allow me, I will share this survey with you. It will be great if you have some time to fill it out. I know that some of you already filled it out, but for people who didn't fill it, maybe you can have like 20 minutes to fill it out. So finally, thank you very much for this. I will communicate you very soon, most probably during the coming weekend by the certificates to thank you and with the rest of the information as well. So thanks.
Thank you, Tamer, for organizing.
Thanks, Katrina, and thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.